Hey guys, so in this month's new tutorial, the plan for this tutorial is going to be using some film plates that I shot with my GH5 camera, and we're gonna be basically compositing some assets that we make in Redshift and bring it all together. So for this first part, I'm probably gonna have to split this tutorial up into 2 or 3 pieces just because it's a lot of information and stuff to go through. So for this first part, we're going to just look at converting our plates, getting everything ready, tracking the camera, and sending it out to Houdini. And we might start shading our assets. I'm not sure. We'll see how long this takes. So here we are. We're inside of Nuke. I finally switched over to Nuke 11. It's been a while since I've been on 10, just because I like to stick to stable stuff, and Nuke 11 changed a lot of things. Some things are better, some things I don't like, but you know, I've been kind of getting used to it. So here's our brand new scene, and we're gonna bring in our film plate that I shot. So it's in here, and just so you guys could kind of see what's going on in the shot, it's a real simple shot here. It's 4K, so it is a little slow looking, and it was shot with the GH5 camera in vlog space, so we have more 10-bit vlog, and we're gonna probably pull only a couple seconds of this entire camera move. And at the time when I shot this, unfortunately, I did not write down the exact millimeter length on the lens, and so don't make this mistake, guys. So at the time, I totally forgot to write that down, so I don't know the actual length of the lens we're using here. I know which lens I was using, but I don't know the lens is in a prime, and so I don't know what zoom level I had specifically at this moment. So we're gonna try to do the best camera track we can get with what we know, and so I'll kind of be going over that stuff. And pretty much, I think for our goal for this shot, we're gonna try to maybe composite some building here or something. We might do I don't know, maybe something sci-fi, or I'm not sure yet. And we're going to basically track this shot and bring it in and bring it into ASIS. So right now, like I mentioned, this is shot in Vlog. So these are the type of notes that you want to keep when you do an actual shot. I also shot in HDR at the same location. So we're going to use the HDR for our GI lighting of our asset, and then we're going to use a directional light or area lights to get stronger specular once we move into Houdini. So cool, let's bring that shot in. So we're going to just drop this in here and let that load for a second, and let's just bring it up. For now, we're going to work in half resolution. And our first steps first, we need to switch over to OCIO, since we're going to be using ASIS. And actually our working resolution is UHD 4K. So let's switch over to UHD. For our color management, we're going to use OCIO. And we're going to load up our OCIO profile by switching from OCIO config nuke default to custom. And then we're going to look for our ASIS profile. You guys, if you guys watched my ASIS tutorial, you already kind of know how to get it and all that stuff. So I assume you guys have watched that video, since we're going to just kind of go through the ASIS stuff quickly. I'm not going to just sit down and talk about it all. So let's open that up, and we're going to use just the standard ASIS config. I don't want to use my custom one just because I want you guys to just use the default. The default is good enough for this scene. And so we're going to get an error because the README is reading in the incorrect color space. So we need to come up here into the color space section, and what we want is, this is an input, so we're going to go to input, Panasonic, because this is the Panasonic GH5, and it was shot with Vlog. So as soon as we switch that over, you're going to notice that our colors are much brighter, and this is the way to actually view our shot in Aces Space. So if we skip forward here, you'll notice this is the shot we've got. So right now we're viewing our shot in sRGB Aces. We could check it out in Rec 709. I actually like the Rec 709 D60 Sim more. Just gives it a nicer, warmer hue, simulating the a D60 Candela monitor. And I prefer the look that Rec 709 gives. sRGB is, like I said, old. If you've watched the Aces tutorial, most monitors, LCD monitors, they're all made for Rec 709. So anyways, cool. So here we've got our shot. Let's kind of scroll through. I think we'll start maybe here, maybe a little further back. No, I think we'll start here, around 250, and 400, so that our hero asset will be closer to the middle, but not exactly in the middle, and it'll start out around one of the thirds of our composition here. So in order to shift that over so that we're not working with the 1044 frames and we actually only focus on what we need, we will be using the retime node. So if you start typing retime, come in here, plug that in, you have your input range and your output range. And so what we want is 250 to 400. That's what I think we agreed on. And so that'll give us 150 input and out. And we'll come back down to our project, our root project, and we're going to switch this over to 150. So this should give us only, there we go, 150 frames to work with, which I think is enough for a shot like this. It's a couple seconds. Usually you don't have a shot like this on screen for too long. So cool. This limited our shot to these frames, and we shifted it back to 1 through 150. For our project directory, actually I already have this set up with all my Houdini stuff, but let me repoint it there so that all our stuff shows up. And so we're gonna just copy paste here the directory, and actually there's a specific folder in here, and inside of Nuke script I have actually a couple already saved here, but this will be the directory, and we'll just give this a name. And I probably should actually get rid of these, but let's just say Patreon beach scene. '01. Let's make sure. Script, blah, 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 blah. Yep. Actually, I could just save it up this way. And yeah, I think this, I'll just remember that this is the one. I'll get rid of the other ones just so I don't get confused later, and I don't send them to you guys when I send the scenes files. Okay, cool. Um, I'm also, when I do send this to you guys, I'm not going to give you the video file because this is like a gig, maybe larger. I'm going to just give you frames 1 through 150 just to make things easier for you guys. And we're going to have to write these out anyways, so I'll show you guys how to do that in a little bit. So cool. We've got our shot. It's in ASUS space. We're working in ASUS now. And we converted our footage from log space from Panasonic Vlog into ASUS, and we retimed our shot. So now what we need to do is, normally we would be shooting, and actually I should probably reformat this to a smaller size, but I think I'll deal with that later. Normally you would be removing the distortion on this lens, but that's actually the problem. We don't have an idea of what the lens distortion is because we don't know the size of the millimeter length of our shot, and so that can cause problems. For example, if I pull in, and I do have some for other lenses, so I want to show you guys how to do it, but for this particular shot I can't show you guys since I don't have an idea of what this was shot in with, so we're going to use an estimation method. But normally you would do it this way. So we would load in our, here we go, our checkerboard. So if we look at this real quick, it's just a checkerboard that you shoot head on, and you basically run it through the lens distortion, and it calculates the distortion of your lens. So there's a node called lens distortion, so we drop this in here, and pretty much all you got to do is just tell it, you know, the type of lens, spherical, anamorphic. This in particular was spherical, rectilinear, is it fisheye, etc., etc., and what mode to detect, features, links, or grids. So this is a grid, a checkerboard grid, and so it detects these edges, and you just hit solve and undistort, and usually it's pretty good at it, you know. See, it straightened everything out. And so if I disable this, let's zoom in here. It's pretty subtle, but you can see it happening on the edges here. Actually, let me close that so you can see it better. Yeah, you can see it kind of, let's zoom in. See that? So the distortion is happening, and this would be an easy, cheap way to get your lens distortion out. There's people in departments that are dedicated to doing this stuff and tracking. I'm not that guy, you know, so we're just going to do it the cheap and dirty way. But like I said, usually someone else handles this work, and they do a really good job at it. But you know, we're assuming that you got this data from someone else higher up in the chain, or if you're just working by yourself on a shot, you know, and you're going to do it manually, this is the way I would do it. But I'm not, like I said, I'm not a pro compositor, and I'm not a guy that knows camera tracking like crazy or anything like that. But knowing the basics is good, so at least you can get rolling. So like I mentioned, we don't know the length of the lens that was used here for this shot, so we have to basically use an estimation method. So normally, like I said, you have the grid, and that's how you figure it out. So to do this, we're going to just dive right into tracking the shot. We're going to just start dropping a tracker down, and so we're going to plug this in here, and let's actually save. And so for this, we're going to go full resolution again, because we want as accurate as possible of a track with what we got. And so what we have to do is fill out this information with what we do know. So what do we know? We have the input range. We know that it's rotation only. When I shot this, it was on a tripod, and I just rotated the camera. So instead of a free camera, it's not linear, and it's not a planar. It's a rotation only. The lens distortion, there is lens distortion, but we don't know the lens, so we're just going to go with unknown lens. And you can undistort or the input. This can help figure out the tracking better. Normally you would, like I said, use the checkerboard and undistort your shot first, but since we don't have that data, we're going to have to do it this way. And the focal length, unknown. It's constant though. It's not zooming in or out, so that's good. We just have no idea. If you knew the focal length, you could type it in, or if you had a general idea of a constant or varying, then that'd be okay. But it's an unknown constant. We have no idea. For the film back, this data we do know. Since we know the camera brand, you can just Google the sensor size. And so if we bring up some notes here on the camera, I know that the camera was shot in Vlog. It's a 4K shot, UHD. The frame range that I decided to go with, the image resolution, and here we have the sensor. And so this wants it in millimeters, so we're going to do 17.3 and 13. So if we type in here 17.3 and 13, that is our film back size, which is the sensor size. And that's about all we know. And so now we got to just try to track this shot by just hitting track. Now you could change by adding your own custom tracks, which can help. And under the settings, you could add more features. It just takes longer to track, but you're going to have more data points. So we're going to increase this to, let's just go with 400, which is a good amount. Because we're going to end up getting rid of a lot of them, since a lot of them are going to be in the water or maybe in the sky, and we don't want those. We want them just here. And we could mask this using a little roto paint and just paint around, but we're going to just manually just cut them out. And yeah, let's hit track and see what we get. So this, I'm going to pause this because this could take maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes or something. So we're going to just hit track and let it do its thing. And it's going to start generating points. And it says it's going to take about 3 minutes, maybe more. So we're going to let it do its thing, and I'll pause this and be back. Alright guys, we're back, and here we've got the result of our track. And so we're going to actually get rid of most of these down here. These probably aren't going to do us much good. And there's one up here. Okay, cool. I think the rest here on the shore are okay, and these up here. So we're going to go to right click on them and delete selected. And let's get rid of these two. Okay, cool. Now after this, we're going to hit solve. And this is going to solve the track points that we've got. So if we hit solve, and I probably should hit save in case it crashes, but we'll see what happens. This might take another couple minutes. So again, I'm going to just, oh, maybe it didn't. Yeah, I'm gonna pause this because I don't know if it just crashed or what happened. So let me pause. All right, guys, we're back. So I actually had to drop our number of features. It was too many and it was causing an error. And so I brought this back down to 150, which is the default. And I ran the track through and I let it solve. And as you can see, we've got these red tracks here and there. And so what those are, they're basically just bad rejected tracks according to our threshold errors. So we're going to just get rid of the rejected. And we could keep the water ones. We could get rid of them. I'll see what we do. I might actually get rid of them. I don't think we need them. So we're going to also delete those. And now that we've got our track here going, and I already solved it, hitting the solve key, what we need to do is give this a sense of scale so that we know roughly the scaling when we send this out. So I know that this little cliffside, I believe, is about 9 meters. I just used Google and got an average. So it's not perfect, but you know, this is close enough. So you select 2 points. We know that this is the ground edge of the cliff, and we know this is about the height of the cliff here. So you're going to right click them. You're going to go to scene, add scale distance. This will give us a little line. And if we come up to the right on scene for distance, we're going to make this 9, which is about 9 meters. And so this is going to scale up our scene. Or maybe we could even, let's see, this little cliff edge, I think someone standing next to this would be maybe half this height. So actually, let's get rid of this since this is at an angle. Let's get rid of this one. Oops. Uh-oh. Deleted the entire track. Delete the constraints. There we go. And I'm going to just assume this to here. Actually, let's see if we could find a better angle. Yeah, let's do this. I think a person standing next to this would be pretty small. And so the average person is about 1.6 meters in height. So I'm going to just make the guess that this is double that. So I'm going to just say this is 3 meters. And actually, no, we will use these and just make another estimate. Let's just say 9 or 10, I don't know. Let's go with 10. So our scene uniform scale gets edited, as you guys can see when I change this. And so let's just do 10. What that's going to do is when we export this out to Houdini, it's going to be scaled in our scene appropriately. It's not going to be perfect, obviously, like I said, but it's, you know, it's close enough. Whoa. Actually, let's switch to half res to make zooming in a little easier. And let's save our comp. Let's come down here and let's get rid of these points. No idea why it's not selecting them. No, whatever. Okay, let's just export this out. So now, let's just see. I think this will be good enough. If we go under scene, here under the export, there's different things you could export. You could export the camera, scene, scene plus, point cloud. We're just going to do scene. This will give us the camera and the point cloud, which is, we only want that for this. And we're going to just hit create. Let's move our viewer down. And let's just look at the scene through our camera here. And here's our point cloud. So if we come over here to our tracker and let's just increase our point size. Let's just do 25, 40, 50. Yeah, that's good enough. So we kind of get an idea of the shape, the blob of what's going on. And so our camera is moving left or right. It's a little bit of a sway actually. And I might retrack this again to make it a little more accurate, because it kind of might not be good enough, but we'll see. We'll see how this looks. You know, this is a cheap and dirty track. And let's scroll through here. Yeah, some of these down on the water, we don't really need them. I don't think they're going to help make the track any cleaner, but we'll see how it ends up. And yeah, let's export this out. So to write this out, oops, start typing write, and you'll see write geo. So we're going to plug this into our scene. And I should probably start to organize all this stuff in a little bit. With backdrops. So let's actually do that. Retime. Type in backdrop. And, you know, if you guys know what these are in Houdini, they're just, you know, for organizing stuff. So we're going to just say camera track. Type in cam track. We'll make this that color, and cool. And let's just save this out. For our write geo, we're gonna write this out. And so here's our folder structure, and we're actually gonna save this into our Houdini scene under ABC for Alembic, and we're gonna call this camera track point cloud dot, or actually 01 dot ABC for Alembic. So that'll switch it over to Alembic mode, the file type, and you could save out stuff. We don't have any geometry in here. We're not going to need it. I think we just need the point cloud to kind of guesstimate locations. and just the camera. So we're going to get rid of geometry and axes, and we're going to just use point cloud camera. The format, we could do Ogawa or HDF, doesn't really matter. And location set, we're not limiting the frame range. We want all 150 frames. The view we want is our main. And yeah, that should be good to go. So let's save this again before we try to export this. And let's execute. Frame, global, 1 through 150. And let's hit OK. That was really weird. Something is totally looking weird. But it might be working fine. We'll see. And actually, oh, it might be related. No, we'll see. Something before I actually write this out, I need to check the camera. So make sure the camera is selected here. And under the curve editor, we need to look especially at the Y rotation. It seems to be okay. It's just moving this way. Because you don't want, for like one split frame, to have a 360 rotation, because then when we render, it's going to give us a huge rotation blur. So we don't want that, but I think this is okay. This looks fine. Just to make sure we look at the movement. I think it's okay. So we're going to test this out. We're going to take this into Houdini and just see if it the camera's even moving correctly. And after that, we're going to come back in here and we're going to export our back plate that we're going to end up using to lay out our assets visually on top of the point cloud we got here. And like I said, I might need to retrack the shot with a little better of a track, but you know, we're right now we're kind of just assembling everything and seeing how things go. And we could always update the camera and the track, so that's not really necessarily a problem. And even though this is 4K, I think our final resolution, we're going to do something, a different aspect ratio, maybe clip the bottom and the top. And we'll be using 2K just because 4K is huge. I don't think we need 4K quality, to be honest. And so we'll be referencing our aspect ratio chart here. And so right now, 4K, standard 4K, the 4K that we're using, which is 2160, is 1.90. Oh wait, no, UHD. Here we go. Because we're not regular 4K, we're UHD. So 2160, which is 1.78. So this is the aspect ratio we have. So if we convert this down to 2K from 1.78, 1.78, where is it? There we go. It'd be 2048 by 1152. But if we want like a widescreen kind of a look, we're going to need something like 240. That might be actually too trimmed, but we'll check this out. So we might do 240 or 239 and see how it looks. And actually, let's real quickly let's preview this. Actually, go to the retime here, and let's do a reformat. And let's try 239. So we'll do 2048, 858. 2048, 858. That might be trimming a lot actually, but we'll see how it looks. 2K 239. And this is actually anamorphic, so this wasn't shot with an anamorphic lens, so I don't think we're going to clip way too much, but let's see what we get. And that's not too bad. We clip the bottom, we clip the top. Actually, let's close the tracks and everything else. This is cool. I mean, I don't think it's trimming too much. So I think for our final aspect ratio, we're going to go with this. So this gives us room to add our building here, and it's, you know, it's nice widescreen and cinematic. So, okay, I think that's our decided format. So we're going to go with that. With the 2K anamorphic 239 aspect ratio. But we're going to render at 4K just because we might take this into Mari, or we'll just project onto it in Nuke and then rescale it downward so the detail kind of gets obscured. Usually you want to work at double res when you're going to do any DMP work. So we're going to keep working in 4K for our render and any projections we might do on top or texture work. And our final resolution, though, our output, is going to end up being 2K. And right now this is actually being cropped down further. So it's a 1:1. I think this is good enough resolution. So this is a 1:1 quality, which I think is good. And we're going to probably come in here and tweak our plate a little bit too before we write out our plate. So we're going to probably come in here and get rid of some of the blue grain and stuff like that. So we're going to move on to that next. First, we're going to just send this out to Houdini and check the geometry, the camera move, and if it looks okay, then we're going to come back in here and tweak our plate, and then write this out as a EXR sequence to load as our backdrop inside of Houdini. So yeah, let's move on to Houdini. Hey guys, so here we are back inside of Houdini now, and we're going to bring in the camera that we just built and set up our scene. So let's drop down our redshift ROPS. We'll just use brute force. And this is actually using redshift 3, but I don't think I'll need it to activate RT core acceleration anymore, just because there's no point. Our scene's going to be very simple, probably. Just one object or a few objects. Let's jump up to object mode or object context and come up to file and import. And we're going to import Alembic. And so we saved it into our Alembic folder. And inside of here, we've got our camera track, point cloud, ABC. And so let's load that up. This file, this Alembic file, contains both our camera and our point cloud. So here in the object path, if you click on this, you'll have a list of all the objects inside the Alembic file. And so we've got cameras and points. So we're going to load in first our camera. Just hit import, and inside of our settings for our camera, we're gonna work eventually with 4K, but we're gonna just do 1080p for now. And let's jump back up to object level. And so here's our camera, and here in the Alembic file, you'll see that we have the file path and then the object path of the object we're using. So we want to bring in the point cloud now, so we'll just duplicate this. We'll call this alembic points. Alembic camera. And like I mentioned, later on, if we decide to make a better track, we could always just replace the camera and alembic file and just load up the new one. But for now, that we want to just make sure everything's working okay, so we'll just use this one that we've got. And now, for our alembic points, we need to switch from cameras to points. And we need to click Build or Update Hierarchy. So if we click that, you'll notice our points have appeared. And our camera is way down here. So if we look through our camera, here are our points that we built inside of Nuke. And so it kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. We had our little cliff edge and stuff, and our water, our shore. So this lets you kind of get a general idea of the layout in terms of scale and distance. So if we move, you'll notice how far away our points are and our scale, our height. And so that's going to be roughly what the heights and distances that we used, which were like, I think it was like, what, 9 or 10 meters high and stuff like that. So if we switch over and we've got our camera, you'll notice that our cliff edge is probably, I think this is 5. So yeah, so something like 10 meters total or whatever, right? And so, cool. Everything seems to be okay. Let's just drop down a box, and we're going to just move it into place. Let's move that over here, and this is just going to be layout box, and this will just help us kind of get a general feel of locations. And actually, let's just increase this uniformly. Let's look through our camera. I'm going to just leave it there. We're going to make it taller. And we'll make 2 of them. And we'll make this one a little shorter. And I mean, I don't know how we're going to lay out the buildings or whatever, right? We haven't figured that out yet. This is just kind of just get a position and a sense of scale kind of going. Let's just say this one's a little further back or something. Okay, cool. And let's save this. So now how do we know if this is lined up with our shot? So in order to do that, we need to bring in our dome light. Let's make a redshift dome light. And we're going to need a few things to be brought in here. So we need to bring our HDR, but I need to convert our HDR to ACES since we're working with ACES. And we're going to need to bring in our backplate. And this, we're going to have to also convert into ACES. And we're going to have to generate one for all 150 frames. So let's actually make this 150 frames. And let's save this. And actually, let's move the dome light away from our camera so it's not in the way. And it isn't selectable. Alright. And let's save here, and let's move back to Nuke. It seems like our points are laid out okay. Let's move back into Nuke and write out our HDR and our backplate in ASYS and save those out and load them back into Houdini. So I'm going to pause this. Alright, we're back in Nuke. And actually we need the full 4K shot. This was kind of just an idea of the final aspect ratio we might use. So what we need to do is write this out. So we've got our vlog cam, and actually let's move this to the side. We're gonna keep our track separate, and we're gonna have a new backdrop here and we're gonna re-import our footage, but this time we're gonna bring it in based on the output we make right now. So from the retime node, let's drop down a right image, and let's actually make this a little bigger just for organization purposes. And let's drop down a dot. We'll drop that in here. And so this is going to be our original plate. Let's actually make another backdrop. And actually, we'll get rid of this point, and we'll just move it up here to the side. And we'll call this the plate. Since this is the original footage, and let's change the color for this. Could move it this way. Yeah, we'll just keep it here. And so we're going to write out, if we hit 1 here, our full 4K backdrop. And we actually don't have to make it 4K. We could, well, no, we're actually going to use 4K because we're going to read it back in as 1 through 50 frames. So that way we don't have to use the original vlog footage. So let's come in here to our right, and for our color space we need this to be written out in ASYS CG. So it's reading in as the ASYS vlog input, and we need to write this out now as ASYS CG. And our location is, where is it? Patreon 19 footage, and I'll make a new folder and we'll call this I don't know, frame, no, because it's not going to be processed yet. We'll just call this footage cut, and we'll say beach footage for the name. Actually, we'll call this beach footage ASYS CG. And we'll add 4 frame buffers, even though we know we're only going to do 150, but 4 is a good number to always have. And it's going to be a .exr. And so now this is going to write out into ASYS space our EXR, and we could load this in, and we're actually going to reprocess this. So let's keep this just like this. We'll just keep it as 16-bit zip, and we're going to render all 150 frames. And actually this reformat, we could unhook that. We'll just keep this on the side for later. And we're going to write this out. So let's do 1 through 150. Let that write. And we'll give that a minute. And I'll pause this so you guys don't have to watch while this does its thing. So it's going to take a couple minutes. And so right now we're going to write all 150 frames as EXR files. Alright guys, the renders are done. So if we move over to check our footage folder, we've got our footage cut, and here we've got all our EXRs. So cool. Now what we also need to do is convert our HDR. So if we come into our Houdini folder under textures, it's here. So let's actually drop this in, and we'll just copy this since it's already using ASYS space, and we'll just convert this to color space, ASYS CG. This should be okay if we write this out as ASYS CG. And actually the input for our read for our HDR here, so let's preview it. So this is our HDR, and it's not perfect. I didn't even take photos of the ground straight down, but this is good enough for our ambient light. And I even just brushed in Photoshop some stamp tooled some of the sky that kind of got distorted and weird, but this is good enough. So just so you guys know, you don't need a perfect HDR if you're just using it for global illumination, just GI. So, and since these objects are outdoors, there's nothing really refractive, it's not going to make a big difference. So let's come in here, and we need to convert this to utility linear sRGB down here. There we go. And so now our writing space needs to go into ASYS CG. That is correct. And let's change our location. So let's come up. Let's go up a level again. Go to Houdini. Texture. Here we go. And we're going to use the same name, but we're going to change it to ASYS CG. That way we know it's prepared for ASYS. And let's hit render. And actually this we don't need to have as a full zip quality. We could just turn this into DWA, DreamWorks. And this will compress it and give us a smaller file size. We don't need crazy quality for this. So let's hit render, 1 of 1, and that should be done. And so if we bring that in again, it appears to be okay. And we'll just keep this on the side for now. We might not need it later, but you never know. And cool. Okay, so let's save here. And let's move back into Houdini. And just to show you guys that there is a difference, if we come in here, you'll notice that this is a little more washed out gray. And actually, let's do a 100%. Well, actually, no, fit on screen. Fit on screen. And if I swap between the two, this one's more saturated, and this is the Asus prepared one. So it's a subtle difference, but it does make a difference, just so you guys know. Okay, cool. Now let's come into our dome light, and under our shader, go up to text, and we're going to load up our Asus CG. And for, oh, actually, no, this is the backplate. We need to load it up here for our dome map, since this is actually going to light our scene. And let's rotate that. To roughly the same general direction. It's not perfect, but, you know, it's good, close enough. And I don't want it in the viewport since it kind of makes it hard to see our points. Let's move over to our backplate now and jump up a level. Oops. Jump up a level, jump up a level. And actually I should probably copy paste this back in, but we're going to process our background in Nuke a little more, clean up the noise and stuff before we finalize this. So, but this is just to make sure everything's lining up. And let's come in and do our footage. And Asus CG 1 through 1. Yeah, so okay. So as long as it loads up as a sequence. And we want this in render aspect ratio. And this should be good to go. So let's just make a assignment onto our materials here. And we'll just give this a 0.4 roughness. Okay, cool. Let's test this out now. So let's open up the render view. Let's hit play. And right now it's going to create a new camera. We actually need it to load our Alembic camera. So let's switch to Alembic camera. And let's activate Asus in our OCIO. So let's hit that. And let's switch over to Open Color IO. Where is it? There we go. Open Color IO, Asus, and the standard Asus config. And there we go. Now in Nuke, I believe we're using, yeah, the D60 Sim. So let's switch over to Rec 709 D60 Sim. And there we go. We have the same exact look as we did inside of Nuke. And let's hit reload to get our objects here. And they're really dark because our HDR is actually really dark also. So let's come over here. Let's go to our dome light. And actually let's enable it real quick and increase our intensity. Our exposure to 1. Maybe. Oh wait, no, oops. That's the back plate. We want this to be at 0. And our intensity, our exposure here, let's try 1. And we're going to need to bring in a little test sphere. Let's zoom in on our camera. And we're going to just want to drop a sphere down somewhere there. And we'll just move it to the side just to make sure our shading is okay. And it does seem okay. Let's switch to Chrome here. And so the problem is right now we are getting the black ground from our HDR. That's what this black thing is down here. So what we need to do, let's move that way. Let's make a ground plane. And we're going to make this matted. So it's, actually no, we can make the visibility invisible. Here we go. Come to the side. And we'll increase the scale. Something like that. Move it this way. That should be okay. Let's look through our camera. And now our problem is that it's too high, so let's lower it down. Just enough to kind of break the black from the HDR. Okay, cool. And this might be way too bright actually on our dome light, so let's come back to our dome light. Try an exposure of 1. Exposure of 2. Oops, no, that's the hue. 1.5. Yeah, maybe 2 might be good. And yeah, we'll just start to calibrate this to make sure it works out. And so before we go further, let's make sure that everything is lined up here and inside of Nuke. So let's move this to the side. Let's just say right there, and let's make the shader flat again. Let's say plastic with a 0.2 roughness. And let's go back to object. Let's hide our sphere for now. And so if we render this out and we load it back up, we should get the same lineup inside of Nuke. Right now we don't have an alpha, so we need to turn that on our dome light. So if we click our dome light, go down to the bottom, and there's an option called Environment Alpha Channel Replace. Click Enable, and that gets rid of our background in the alpha. Cool. So now let's test this out. So let's save this, and it should line up inside of Nuke. So let's move to our Patreon folder. Houdini scene, render, and we'll just call this render test EXR. And let's move back inside of Nuke. And let's keep always on top off. And so if we drag in our Houdini, actually let's bring in our footage again, but this time we need to bring it in as a sequence. So let's open that up, sequences, and that way this is the frames 1 through 50 already processed but raw from the footage, so they're not in log, they're in ACES space now. So if we click here, there it looks exactly the same, but they're not, it's not the original log footage, and we don't have to use the retime or any of that stuff anymore. And now what we're going to try to do is we're going to bring in our test render. And actually, what frame were we on? Frame 1. And so if we go into texture, or not texture, render, our render folder, and we drag this in, and we check this out. Actually, we need to go to frame 1. It looks the same. So what we need to do is get rid of the background by using a pre-multiply. That'll give us just this. And we're going to use the merge. And we're going to merge. And actually, I think this is 1080p, so we need to reformat. Back to the, what was it, 4K. And switch the A and B, holding the Shift and X key, since we want this on top of our plate. And it looks like it worked out perfectly. So let's zoom in here and see if everything lined up just like in Houdini. So if we move this out of the way. This is obviously 1080p because I say the background was 1080p instead of 4K, but everything looks to be lined up exactly in the same spots. There's that little black dot. This thing is right here. Let's move over here and check this side. And yep, indeed, there's that little twig. Yeah, everything is lined up. So now, cool. So now we've for sure have a calibrated scene. Our footage and our 3D renders and our camera track are all lined up inside of Houdini and inside of Nuke. So now we can actually start putting in real assets and, you know, working with it. But before I do that, we're going to do one more thing, and we're going to process the plate. So we're going to come in here, degrain it, tweak it a little, and then resave this out again and load that back in as our background. So yeah, that's the next step. So now we've got everything in our scene lined up and ready to go. Let's process the footage and then bring in our 3D assets into Houdini and then move on to shading. So we're gonna process our plate a little bit. So let's clean things up and let's drop our a new backdrop down. And where did that go? Here we go. And we'll make this a little big. And we'll just call this plate processing. Oops. And we'll make this 25 or 30. We'll change the color. So something like that. And Let's keep this over here. So what we want to do is basically adjust our plate a little bit, clean it up a bit. And usually you actually might want to do this before the camera tracking. So if I do decide to retrack, I'm going to use the processed footage and pipe it back in instead of using our original movie file that's using log. So we'll see if I end up doing that or not. Might not need to. And so if we zoom in here, this is our initial plate. And so something that we could probably do is degrain it. So if we check the blue channel, usually it's the grainiest, the dirtiest of channels. And actually, did I write this as 1080p? No. Okay, and so we're going to use a degrain node. And so there's a degrain blue filter. And what that does is it does exactly what it says. It degrains the blue channel. So if we come in here and look at maybe some of these shadows here, and we disable it, it kind of cleans up the shadows a little bit, helps out the blues. So if we look at it in color, it's really subtle, and it kind of brings a little blue cool into the shadows. And what we're going to add next is maybe some sharpening. But we're not going to sharpen the every channel. We're only going to sharpen the red and green channels, and we'll keep the blue channel the way it is. So in order to do that, we need to split this into separate channels and then merge them back in. So first we're going to just drop down a sharpen. And right now that's just sharpening everything, as you can see. It's really sharpening the whole shot. And so we want to isolate this to specific channels. And actually, before we do that, let's do a denoise. And so we'll plug that in here. And it uses your GPU, which is great. And the source is digital. It's not an actual film plate. The noise model, we'll just keep it modulated since it's changing. It's not constant. And you want to have something that's pretty smooth that will actually give you the noise profile. So something like this in the horizon out here or up in the sky would work pretty well. So down here you get this little box. This lets you select a sample region. So we're going to choose something right around here, which looks kind of grainy. And so if we zoom in and enable and disable this, you'll see the result, especially here on these little cliffs. It's subtle, like if we come in here. But yeah, you can see it going on. And so the reason why we want to do this right now and clean up the plate is because the CG that we're going to render is going to be really clean also. And so the idea is that at the end, once we're compositing everything back together with the CG, we want to add our own grain on top of everything so it's consistent. And so, okay, cool. We've got that degrained now and denoised. We could adjust it, you know, if we want it to be a little stronger, but I think this is good enough. But we want to also bring in a little sharpness to the shot, since CG is also super sharp. And so what we're going to do is let's drop down a dot right here. And so we're gonna merge the channels that we don't want sharpened back in front of the sharpened channels. So hopefully that makes sense. And so what we need to do that is we actually need to use a channel merge node. So if you type in channel, you'll get an option for channel merge. And so what this will let us do, it's similar to the merge node, except this merges channels. And so what we're going to do is bring this back into here as A. So if we plug that in, let's move it to the side, make a couple dots. And so for the channel merge, what we want to merge in is actually our blue, and what we want it to be replacing for our output is none for the B. Where is B? None. And so what's happening is B's coming in sharp, everything, but we don't want the blue channel actually from there. And so our output is just going to be the blue channel. So it's bringing in our original blue channel, which is A. So from up here, bringing it in. And then for our B channel, we're just keeping it the same and merging back down, but removing the blue. So the blue is being switched from up here into here, while our red and green are coming from the sharpen section from B path. And so if we look at this, if we look at B, you'll notice there is no difference between here and here. See? They're the same. But if we look at our red channel, our red channel is being sharpened. See that? So this is from up here without the sharpening, and then oops, here is with the sharpening. So the sharpening is affecting things, but not our blue layer, since typically blue layers you want to keep softer, and that's where you want to be doing your degraining and denoising. Okay, cool. And let's actually look at this now as its beauty, and it might be a little too sharp, so we're going to adjust that, maybe bring it down a little bit. Right now it might be a little too strong, so let's try a size of 2. That's a little more subtle. Let's disable and enable it. I think that's still too sharp, so let's try a size of 1.5. That's a little better. It's a little more subtle. Maybe 1.3. Just a little more subtle. Yeah. So this brings in a little bit more of that sharp edge detail right here and stuff. But it keeps the overall image still kind of soft and not too sharp. Let's check out these edges here. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, cool. Let's close all that. And I think this now is a little cleaner, denoised, degrained in the sky. If we come up to the water, it looks a little smoother. And so if we compare this result with the original plate that we had, and here, it's subtle, but you could see it. You can see the grain. And then now it's smoother. Let's come down here, check out this. Yeah, so you can really see it here in the darker colors. This kind of like the artifacting with different colors and stuff, and now it's smoothened it out. So cool. I think this is processed enough. I mean, we could, you know, there's people that are dedicated to just adjusting the plate. Like I said, this isn't a compositing tutorial, but these are just kind of the basic things you want to do. All right, let's move on. We might do a sky removal, might not. I might just use cards if I want to add clouds. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I think this is good enough. And so we're going to write this out now. And we're going to write this out in 1080p, since we don't need the background to be that high quality anyways. We already know that the original source is 4K, and we're not going to be using the background anyways. We're just using it for layout in Houdini. So we're going to write this out again. And we'll make this the oh, actually we need to do a reformat first, since we want this to be 1080p instead of 4K. So 1080p. Instead of UHD. Let's move this up. And we're going to write this out into our Houdini folder path, since we're keeping this inside of our just like global project path. And that way it's easier for Houdini to access it. So let's hit that. And actually, we'll keep the same name, but we'll call this 1080p. Get rid of that. And the locations, oops, actually should have copy pasted that name. Let's get rid of that. 1080p. We'll copy that name. And let's jump up a bit, go to our Houdini scene, and we'll keep it under textures, but we'll give this a new folder. So this will be our plate. We'll just call this plate. Frames. And we'll save it in there. And for this, the quality could be compressed, so we're going to use DWAA, the DreamWorks compression. And yeah, this should be cool. So let's render this out, all 150 frames, and hit OK. So I'm going to pause this and open up Houdini. And we're going to move to Houdini now with our processed plate. And we're going to start to actually bring in our assets. And the assets that we do end up bringing in, I'm probably going to just use some pre-built stuff from somewhere. I don't want to actually build the building myself. Usually you don't have to in a production environment, but and this tutorial isn't going to be about, you know, modeling in Houdini or whatever. You guys could use whatever you want to model. I can't unfortunately share the model if it is something that's purchased, but you guys can implement any models you guys have. So if you could want to add a castle or whatever, you guys could do the same thing. You could just replace the file that's going to get loaded in, and we'll do some basic shading just to kind of see how things are working. And after that, we'll test it out in Nuke, and I think that'll wrap up this first tutorial. And then the next tutorial, we're going to look at using Mari and projections to add more detail if needed. but we'll see where things go, since we're still kind of figuring it out. But yeah, okay, so I'm gonna pause this and head over since it's almost done inside of Houdini. All right, guys, so we're back inside of Houdini, and I used some buildings from Kitbash 3D, and so they're pretty popular. If you guys haven't heard of them, they are not free, so I can't share these buildings with you, but you guys can load up your own assets and do whatever with them. I can share the renders once we go back into Nuke and stuff, but I just can't share the actual assets themselves. And so if we zoom out real quick, we've got our camera, we've got our little sphere, our dome light, our point data, and so these are the buildings that I brought in. This is one building. I might not end up using them all, but we'll see. This is another building. A larger hero building. And what's pretty neat about these assets is that they are already ready to go with groups. So if we jump in here, we've got different groups, dark metal, glass groups, so you could easily shade the assets. And I believe they are also UV'd. Yeah, so they're also UV'd, ready to go. So in case you guys need to do anything else, they're really nice assets, and they usually have some pretty nice sales, so they're not too expensive for a pack, like a world pack. So this comes from the what pack was it? The Utopia pack. So it's like a sci-fi pack, but they have packs for like Rome and different other civilizations and stuff and looks, or like Neo Tokyo, kind of like Blade Runner-ish type buildings and stuff. We're gonna go with something super sci-fi, so I think this is cool. And yeah, so we're gonna lay these all out in a little bit, but we're gonna do it using the viewport. So what we need to do is, let's jump into our Alembic camera. We need to actually have our plates that we rendered a little earlier displayed back here, so it makes layout a little easier for us without actually having to render in Redshift just yet until we start shading. So in order to do that, we need to jump into your camera view. So here's our Alembic camera. You need to activate the lock so that you're locked into the camera, and then in your viewport hit the D key, which is the display options, and you'll have all these different options. We want to go to the tab that says background, and the background you could switch to dark, gray, but what we want is actually the image back here. So there's these tabs down here. We want camera, which is the actively selected camera, and from there we're going to just go, we want a disk file, so you select this. And inside of our texture plate frames, we've got our sequence here. So we select that, and we just check on auto place, and that should automatically place our image into the correct location. So if I hide the grid, it matches our resolution and our aspect ratio. And this is 1080p, since, like I said, we don't need this to be 4K. We want smoother response anyways. And since we're not, the background doesn't really matter for our purposes. And yeah, so now if we scroll around, we've got our animation playing in the background. And so this will help us now if we start to lay out some assets. Let's jump in here and let's scale this further down. That might be too small, but now we can start experimenting. And we could split our screen here. So let's split it this way. Actually, no, let's oops. Let's close this pane. Let's actually split it the other way. so we can get a better view. And we'll just lay out everything in our viewport here. And so if we look around, our points, and let's actually make the background dark. There we go. And that'll just make it easier to see our points. And so currently, we want to move this around. Let's actually scroll down. Here we go. So I think the point location's okay. We just need to bring this down. Maybe we'll rotate it. Something like that. And maybe we'll make it a little smaller. Let's go with 0.2. 2.5. Maybe we'll keep it somewhere right there. And yeah, we'll just keep going through our assets here, loading them up and moving them around. It's too small. And let's just see what we kind of get here. We're kind of getting a little bit of sliding going on right here in this area, so I might have to retract the camera to get a smoother move. Might not. We'll see. Let's disable that. Let's check this out. Yeah, there's a little bit of sliding going on right in the first few frames, so I'm gonna have to try to get a better track. But overall, it's not bad. Oops. Yeah, somewhere in the first few frames there's an issue. But yeah, overall the track is working, which isn't bad at all. So let's drop down to matte node, since we're going to want to shade this. And we're going to do it by group. And there's quite a few groups here. And actually, I don't think when I split this up, I think some of the groups, these are some groups that aren't even included in this geometry. So I'm going to need to go back before I split the object with a blast from all the other objects, and I'm going to actually have to delete the extra group data, since we don't need all that. Seems like these are the only groups that matter right here. So yeah, I'm gonna have to reprocess the geometry, but for now I think this is okay. We've got a decent idea of what's going on. Let's actually just fire off a render and see what we get. And actually this is an old render. It was still open. And switch over to our Lembic camera. Let's reload. And actually I need to use the, I think I didn't update the dome light to use the new, yeah, so this is using the old tech, or yeah, no, this is using the old texture here. Yep. So let's update this. Footage, yep. Let's jump up a level, go to Houdini scene. Inside of our texture, plate frames, and load that up. And that's just lower resolution since we don't need the full resolution anyways. Let's keep this at 100. And let's reload. And I know that the background's blurry and stuff, but we're going to end up matching the blur using Z-depth inside of Nuke, so we have more control and don't have to re-render everything. And I think our perspective feels a little weird at the bottom. But what we're going to end up doing is we're going to load in some trees and we're going to make those mats and cut the shape out right here ourselves. Or we might actually just cut the sky out and in Nuke and then just place this in between it. So we'll see how we decide to approach that to make an alpha to cut through here. But I think for our basic layout, things look okay. Let's scroll through here. Yeah, nothing seems too out of the ordinary. So, okay, cool. So I'm going to lay out some of these objects, and until I get a composition I feel happy about. And this building might actually be too small for the scale here, since this is some trees. So I might have to make this really far, or I'll bring it over here and push it back further. We'll see how I end up deciding how to lay this out. I'm not going to bore you guys with the layout just while I'm moving buildings around, since it's not really, you know, anything too important you guys need to see. So I'm going to just play around with the composition for a while, and I'll be paused until then, and once everything looks okay, I will start shading, some basic shading going on, just to see how everything looks. So, and I also have to reprocess the groups, since the objects have all the groups that aren't included. So I'll be right back. Thanks. Hey guys, so we're back. I laid out some of the buildings and I had to retrack our shot because we were getting some slippage, and the track just wasn't that accurate. So, but now everything's looking good, and actually I'll come into Nuke and show you guys the difference here. So I'm going to keep the old track just so you guys can check it out and see what I changed. So this was just a crappy fast track just to make sure things were lining up somewhat. And so the only difference between this track and the new track, and actually let me drop down a backdrop here. Bring this down. And we'll just call this cam track. The difference, so let's move this away since we're not going to use this anymore. And let's move this to the side here. So the and let's call it new. Or yeah. New. Or we'll just keep it just camera track, since obviously one's old and one's new. And let's slide this down a little further. And so the difference is, this original one we just use the plain plate, and in this version we use the process plate, so it's been sharpened a little. And right now I'm using half resolution, but earlier we went through the sharpening process and cleaning it up and stuff, and so from there I just used the a dot to pipe this out, the result of this, and we sharpened it extra for our track, just to make things a little easier for the camera track. Well, let's go to full res to make it easier for the camera tracking to catch that little sharpness and detail. And then from there we use the camera track, and so I'm going to show you guys the settings, the difference here. In our original camera track, if we select that, so it's camera track 1 and camera track 2. 2 is the new one, and let me just type in new just so you guys can tell. And so in our original camera track we had no idea about the lens or any of that stuff. All we knew was the film back, and under our auto track and our settings I only used 150 points, and so this was just too low quality, I guess, not enough points to get a proper track, and our solve error was way too high. And so what this is, you can think of the solve error as kind of like the quality so of your track. And so you usually want this number to be beneath 1. Anything below 1 is typically a pretty good solve on your camera tracking. So this was way too high, a 5.5. So we were getting errors in our tracking. And so let's close this. And let's switch back to half res. And so if we compared it to the new track, I ended up using 2,000 points, so a lot, but it only added a little bit more solving time. And the reason we needed this many points is because most of this shot is sky, so there's nothing to track. I mean, half the frame I think is, yeah, it's all sky, and there's no clouds. And so usually if there's clouds or something in the air, there's something you could track, but there's nothing. So we needed to get most of our tracking going on the edges of our cliffside and a little bit on the ground on the water. And so using that, we then I went through the settings and I made a minimum length of 12. That's 12. The track has to be in 12 frames at least. And so this lets you adjust the error and stuff like that so that you can tweak the points. So originally there was way more points, but this is the result of getting rid of those points. And so I just deleted the rejected and the unsolved, at this quality setting, and we refined our solve, our focal length, position, rotation, and so that brought our solve error back down to 0.94, which is a lot better than 5. So the quality was a lot higher. And I did the same thing as we did earlier, where I picked 2 points and added a distance. So this is like a distance of 8. I'm going to say it was 9 total, but the tracking point's a little short from the top. And I also selected these the water tracks, or at least some of the tracks on the ground, to use as the ground plane. And so if we hit tab, you'll see here's our points. And so the ground plane, actually, if let me just show you. So if you select some points that you think are the ground are flat, or the ground plane, and you right click them, you set to selected, and that'll give us our flat. The assumption is that this is flat, right? Like this is all part of our flat surface. The water's generally kind of flat ground, sea level. And so this then generated these points where you could see that this is the flat water level. And then we have the bending, which is kind of our cliff where it goes back into the distance, and it's got a little bit of height. So if we were to look through, oops, and actually I need to come down here to select our scene. If we were to look through our camera, this is what we've got. And so you can see that we've got a much smoother camera pan and track. And so, like I mentioned, sometimes you want to just kind of get a loose track in, just to see if things are lining up, or if you're kind of get an idea. And then once you start to refine things, just up your camera track quality by making some adjustments, and spit out a new Alembic Geo. We'll call this number 2. And so we generated the new points and a new camera. And so that's all that we did here. And so I think with a little bit of the processing, it made it easier for the camera to track the points too, the sharpening and stuff like that. So cool. So that's where we're at here. So now we've got an improved camera track that we exported. And let's save that. And go back into Houdini. And so if we check out a flipbook right here, and give that a second to process the flipbook frames. Here we go. This should be ready to go. Now we've got a consistent track. Our buildings aren't sliding around or doing anything weird. And I'm sure, we could improve this track further if you guys really wanted to get it to like 0.6 or something and use less points. If we hide everything else, and let's do another flipbook here. We've got now our slow camera pan. The buildings aren't sliding. They seem to be pretty... There's a little bit of sliding right there, but overall they're pretty stationary. I think it's going to be subtle enough once we mat out some of the stuff right here, and it's not going to be on screen long enough, I think, for people to really catch it. It's going on somewhere right here. But we might not even use these first frames because this is kind of long. This is like way too long already. For a shot like this, you'd probably see it on screen for like 3 seconds. So maybe we'll end up cutting the first 50 frames, and we'll just use 100 frames. So something like this. And actually, let's try that out. So let's go to our flipbook settings, and let's do 50 to 150. Let's just sample that to see kind of how the shot looks before we commit. And for some reason it did not trim the first 50 frames like I wanted it to, which is weird. Frame range, yep. Huh. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Well, either way, I think that's what we're going to end up going with regardless. We're going to probably trim it maybe 50 to 150. So I think right here should be pretty good. We'll trim it here. Let's see what we get. I think this is a good length. We might even trim the last 15 frames or something. But I think this is a good length. So maybe let's do 50 to 100. Let's go a little bit further. Let's just do 125. Yeah, I think this is better. So we've got the little cresting of the wave going on. So we might do this. We might do 50 to 125. Who knows? We'll see. So 1 to 150. But we'll figure that out during the final stage. But yeah, I like this the waves cresting in the foreground. In the beginning, there's not really much going on down here, so I think we'll skip the first starting frames, maybe right around here, while we're still in the thirds. And yeah, so 50 I think is a good starting point, and then we get the wave cresting. Cool. So yeah, I think we've got our camera tracked and solved. We've got our basic layout of our structures. We might, maybe we'll add another structure down here, but I might be able to just use cards in 2D and just Photoshop paint them and put them in the location inside of Nuke and not even have to use a 3D object. So we'll see. I think this is good enough. We should now move on to actually shading, or at least applying basic shaders onto our objects, and then if necessary, we might take this into Mari and further detail the structures, or we might just projection paint right over them. There's not a lot of parallax or perspective change going on, so we might not even need to use Mari. We'll see. Yeah, okay, so let's move on to shading this. So let's jump into our structure, and it's already got some groups set up for us, and I cleaned up the groups earlier. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different groups. So let's add 4, and we've got metal, glass, light metal, and metal. So this is dark metal, so we're going to go dark metal, or metal, light metal, dark metal, and glass. And so we need to make 4 materials. So let's come out here. We'll just make this the I guess we could say this is like a painted material, so we'll just keep this gray. Let's just say metal painted. We'll duplicate this 3 times. We'll say light, dark, and actually we should get rid of these since we're going to probably use material builders to make some more complex materials. So let's let's get rid of all these. And let's just go with material builder. And we're going to call this the metal painted 01. And we're going to just duplicate this 3 times, 4 times. We'll call this glass 01. Dark 01, light 01. For metal painted, let's just say mid, so since it's the mid-tone. And let's just make a flat gray shader that we'll just use to kind of just to gauge the materials. So let's just call this gray. And technically we should gamma correct this if we wanted a 50% gray. So let's do a color correct. And we'll pipe this in as a 0.5 right there, 0.5. Gamma correct this. I think it's got to be a 454. Let's just see. We'll just assign that to our other objects for now. And we'll make this pretty rough. Switch it over to GGX. And okay, cool. Now, for our metal painted, we're going to have to drop down another RS material. And we'll just call this metal paint. And we'll plug this in. And I'm not sure what color we're going to go with yet, so we won't deal with that just yet. This is kind of getting the materials assigned, and we'll figure it out from there. Let's do 0.3 for roughness. Switch over to GGX. Let's copy this. Plug that in. Plug that in. And we'll just make it a little darker so we can distinguish which is which when we assign it. And a new material. Drop this in. Let's slide this over. And for this, we're going to use a glass. Maybe a tinted glass. It's going to be tinted red, but we'll mess with it later. And yeah, let's try this out. And let's save our scene. And let's open up the Redshift render view inside of here as a panel. Since we're not really going to be moving the camera around as the camera's stuck the way we want it, with our camera track. There's no need to move around the scene, and we already laid out our assets for now. We might adjust them in a bit, but for now we're just going to start shading. So let's move into our object. Let's jump into here, and let's assign our object's materials. So glass, metal dark, metal light, and just the mid-tone metal. And let's see what we get. So if we hit play, and actually I think I need a directional light also, not just the GI. And I forgot to put that in. And switch over to our camera. And switch on OCIO, and for some reason it did not save my OCIO path, and so we gotta look for that again. Where is it? Open color, ACES. Here we go. And we might use flare and bloom once we get to shading the rest. We'll see what we end up doing. Might not need it. And let's save. And okay, this is super simple shading, and right now it stands out a lot. And that's just probably due to the atmosphere and stuff like that. I'm not sure if we're going to bake in the atmosphere. We might. And if we'll bake in the depth of field, I think we'll make that decision a little later. And our lighting, let's jump back up a level on our dome light. Let's activate our sphere that we had. And actually, let's come back into our shot. And where is our sphere? There it is. So let's move this. Where is our camera? Oh, it's way over there. Okay. So let's move that over and see if... Nope, still not in view. All right. Uh-oh. Hope it didn't freeze. And actually, I should probably kill the rendering. And let's just move our sphere up here so we could better get a sense of the lighting in the scene. And our grid needs to get larger. Or maybe not larger, we just got to move it. No, we'll make it bigger. Let's do 500 by 500. And that should cover everything. And let's see if that's in the right height. Yep. So let's come in here, and where's the cursor? There we go. And adjust this to get to the horizon. Which is probably somewhere right there. Let's go back into perspective. Switch to our camera, and yes, it is right around there. And I believe matte is on. I don't want to see it in the viewport though, so we'll just say bounding box because it kind of gets in the way. Let's save, and let's open up our render view this way just so we can move it around. Since we might need to make some adjustments right now. And let's try this again. Okay. So this ball, I believe, has no material on it. So let's add our gray material here. So this is really dark. So a pure, or I'm not gonna say pure white because we don't want pure white, but we want like a 0.98. And let's make this pretty specular, just so we can get an idea of what a pure white material will look like. And so yeah, this is about right. And actually, why did it there? It reset my OCIO again for some reason. And so this is a little dark, I think. For my taste. And what happens if we assign our material to our object? We might need that to actually be blue, since it's the blue of the ground, but let's just assign the gray for now. And it looks like it didn't have any influence on the GI. And, yeah, it keeps resetting. That's annoying. I'm going to have to report that. And, as a matter of fact, let me adjust our snapshots folder, our root path. So save snapshots. We want to save our snapshots as EXRs. We'll auto load. And we're going to make our path be the render path inside of our Houdini path. And so, yeah, we're going to just point it into our path. We're going to have it auto load and save our snapshots as EXRs. And hopefully that means later, if I save a snapshot and it acts up for some reason, I can just right click and load the post effects, so I don't have to keep manually trying to fix this. So, okay, cool. Now, this is probably way too saturated. We might end up, making some adjustments later, vignetting and stuff like that, but I think it'd be better off if we left that to do this in Nuke and not deal with it right now. But we'll see how it ends up working out for us. Alright, cool. So now we've got our ground and I believe, let's see here. Yeah, primary, secondary. Yep. Okay. We will eventually set this up to have matte influence instead of being invisible. So if we turn this on and activate matting, let's see what we get here. And once again, our post effects got reset and it did not load. Wow. Yeah, I need to report that because that's really annoying. And if we check our alpha, here we go, we've got our ground. So we don't want our ground to show up. So where is it? Alpha 0. That way, well, we're not even gonna keep the sphere on later, but we just want our buildings. And eventually, if I'm gonna probably bring in some little trees to cut out the bottom a little better, but this is all we want in our alpha. And okay, let's switch back over to RGB. And we might need to make a different material that's gonna maybe give us a little GI underneath things. So let's go to material. Let's keep this always on top. And let's just make another RS material. The way the matting works is it lets your settings from your material show up. And actually, let's do a quick mark. Let's go to our object. And great, we just got a crash. And so I gotta pause this, guys, since it looks like Houdini crashed on us. Alright, now we're back. Yeah, I don't know why it crashed, but all good. So what we want to do for now is we want the water to actually have a little bit of a GI influence on our objects. So we're going to just change the color. So if you look at the color, if I switch it, you'll see how it's a little bluer. If I switch it to red, you'll see that red influence. So we're going to go with something a little gray, something in between these two I think would be good. So let's go with this blue and actually increase the brightness, desaturate it a bit. So I still want a little bit of that color to come in. You can notice it especially back here. Alright, and we're going to use GGX. We do want a reflection influence, and let's do a roughness of 0.1, and we might need to apply bump, a noise to just break up the reflection, and by that I mean this. So if we go up to the object again, and inside our matte settings there's the reflection scale. And so if we increase this to 1, you'll see that now we've got our building being reflected downward, right? And it looks like our geometry is still cutting off a little short. And obviously we're not going to want it that strong. We're going to want something a little weaker. And that way it just it blends it in to our water a little more. And like I said, we're going to add a subtle noise that'll be animated over time, and it'll kind of just fake the rippling on the surface. So let's save that. And let's increase our plane distance, because it looks like, oh no, I guess it is it in view? Oh no, our camera's right here, so it's a little short. So let's go to our grid, and actually let's pause the render since that could maybe crash it. Let's do 600, 800, just to make sure. Let's do 1,000. Oops. That we've got everything inside of our shot. So let's move back over, load it back up, and okay, now our sphere's getting influenced. And again, for some reason, let's load the post effects, switch over to 709, and alright. So this sphere feels like it's fitting in. We've got a little bit of that blue GI from the water, and this is supposed to be a pure white sphere. So if we come in here, you can see that the darks are kind of dark, but they're in the greenish hues. So we're gonna, have to do some compositing magic in the end. But okay, cool. Overall, it's somewhat there. So now we just gotta start working on our materials a little bit. And actually, let's add a little noise to the water bump. So let's do noise, and oh, there it was, RS noise. And we'll probably have to adjust the settings and stuff, but I think it'll be okay for now. And for our time, for our user time, we'll end up probably using $F for frame. So we'll see. Let's move this over. Let's drop down an RS bump. Plug that in. Plug that in to our bump. And I think that completely got rid of our reflection. So maybe something like that. And for our user time, we'll just use $F. And I thought I hit $, but I guess not. $F. There we go. And so that should be changing the noise. And we'll have to tweak the noise scale also. And we might use different models, turbulence or cell. Let's try 0.1. Yeah, and so that's, you can see that it's, we zoom in here, it's catching different specular and shifting a little. So cool. Now let's tweak a little bit of the shaders for the building. So let's save again. And I think this dark material is way too dark. Let's see which one it is. Yep, that's that color. We zoom in here. I think there's something else going on in there. Let's desaturate it. let's come into the glass. And let's just make this regular glass. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's make this GGX. I think plain glass is fine. We could maybe tint it with some transmittance, make it maybe blue. I think that's what's going on right here. Kind of hard to tell. And let's see what material this is. I'm not even seeing it anywhere. So that's kind of weird. Oops. Seems like it's not even in our scene on our object. So that's kind of odd. Let's try this one. Huh. Oh, oops. That's why. I was accidentally adjusting the translucency, not the diffuse. Oh, mistake. Let's come back up to backlighting translucency. Yeah, let's keep this black. Or 0.5, I should say. And let's see. Okay, so that's what that's gonna be. So maybe we could use a little color. Yeah, maybe we'll give that a try. Let's see. For something in the shade. Well, actually, no, it's being hit by direct light. Let's check the pixel intensities. So this is something like value of 1. It's pretty bright. These browns. So let's see what happens if we change the roughness. And let's switch over to metalness. Let's see if we can tweak metalness. See what we get. I don't want a fully metallic object, but I do want a partial. It's maybe 1.5. And let's switch this to metalness also. Maybe a point 1.5. Okay. And we might actually throw in some atmosphere. Let's see. I mean, we might have a little more control if we did that in post with Z depth, but you know, it might work out doing it just all in one shot since Redshift's that fast, and this is, you know, a pretty simple shot. So let's enable some volume scattering, and let's have some fog. And activate attenuation. And that's super, super strong. And we actually don't want it in our background at all. So in order to get rid of it from backgrounds, that's what the environment scale slider is for. So we want that at 0. And that's obviously way too much. Maybe something like this. Let's try 0.3. And let's desaturate that a bit. It's easier to go overboard and then tone it back than the other way around, not have enough. And actually it looks like a little warm haze, not cool. So let's shift the temperature. A little bit this way. Alright, and now we can tone this down a bit. So let's tone it down from our camera. So if you go to 0, it's off, 1 is on. And actually it's being added onto our plane, which we do not want. So I might be better off using Z depth, but we'll keep it on just to kind of get an idea of the look we're going for. We'll go with 0.3. GI influence, that's fine. Let's go back to our materials. And let's desaturate this a little bit. Or maybe darken it. And obviously it's too sharp. We're going to eventually use the depth of field to kind of blur this out a bit to match our plate. But I think this is a good start. So let's move on to quickly adding materials to our other objects. And just check out the camera move a little. We might need to use a directional light to get some hotter specular. Let's jump in here. Let's pause our render. Drop down a material node. Highlight it. Let's move that over. And we actually might be kind of cool if we use a card to add like a moon or something later on in Nuke to kind of make this a little more alien and weird looking. And we might end up post-processing things further, so photographic exposures or using an S-curve to kind of crunch our darks a little, get some more contrast. Some vignette. And desaturate it, maybe just a pinch. So something like that. That's starting to look kind of cool. It's coming together. And since I have that Redshift Tone Mapper tool that I've shared with you guys for Nuke, all we have to do is just copy these settings and it'll work the same way, which is really neat. Our white point, we know that this is a hot white specular. Down here, this isn't hot white, but we know that for sure the sun right there is, so that'll neutralize our shot a little. And let's save, and let's assign our materials here. So we have glass, light metal, metal. So we've got 4 materials again, so let's assign that. Metal, light metal, dark metal, glass. And we might make new materials for the other building. For now, we're going to just slap on the same materials just to kind of get a vibe of how everything's looking. Let's switch that over to mid. Light, dark, and glass. And let's go ahead and do the same for these. So material. And this too has 4, I think that all these buildings do actually. So we'll do metal, light metal, dark metal, glass, and we'll load these up. Dark, light, and mid. I think I'm gonna want different colors for this, or maybe no color. I don't know. We'll see how we approach the shaders later. This is kind of just to get the basic shaders down. I think the part 2 for this tutorial will be more about shading this, maybe taking it into Mari and projection painting and any of the other type of stuff we might do with this. I'm pretty sure this is going to have 4 also. Oh no, it's got 3. And so this has light metal, dark metal, and glass. So let's add that. And let's just see what we kind of get. And once again, our post effects is being reset. No idea why. I think it might be related to our Alembic camera. So if it keeps doing this, I'm going to try to just export an OBJ camera instead of the Alembic camera, just because Houdini might not be liking the Alembic camera. It might be getting locked, and so Redshift can't update the post effects settings. So actually, I should just load this snapshot. What's going on? There we go. And actually, we lost our photographic exposure settings. Again, bummer. We just had this set. Vignette 3. F-stop of 10. A little bit of desaturation. And I'm gonna have to save these again. And actually this might have been, where is it? An f-stop of 8. And we'll tweak these more later. I think that's fine for now. Let's make another snapshot. Make sure they're saving into that folder. Hit the plus sign, that way we don't have to deal with that later. Alright, cool. And so right now this is standing out way too much. And so the sense of scale, the distance, isn't working out. So this needs to be way further back. And that way we can get a better adjustment. So I personally think that getting our Z depth will make it easier to add atmosphere to our objects, but we'll see how that turns out. So let's actually delete these. Save a new snapshot. And we're going to drop in a light. Let's move the camera again just to kind of, yeah, it keeps disabling. Huh. That's really weird. We've got our little reflection on the ground, so that's working out. I think the colors for this need to be different. So we'll go with mid. I think this works a little better. Let's adjust the building that's with it. And let's try mid. Yeah, I think this is better. And I don't, well, let's see, maybe let's try out what happens if we change this to just our mid. I like that orange just because it's really weird. So I'm going to try to make this one work with that orange. We'll see. Okay, cool. Let's save this. And we're probably going to need to build a directional light. So we're going to drop one just right here. And switch the light to distant. We're going to move it this way and point it down a little to kind of try to get it to match the sun, the general direction of the sun. And we're going to make the icon bigger so we can kind of see it better. And right now it's way, way, way too strong. So let's just try one. And it's blowing out our viewport. So we're going to just disable it in the viewport. Distant, yep. Okay. And let's just hit render and see what we get. So yeah, this is too strong. And yeah, our settings keep resetting. So I'm going to save out the camera again for sure. Because having to do this every time is getting annoying. Alright. So our light's way too strong and our color is too pure. So we're going to want to use temperature. And we're going to just try something more like daylight, 4800. That's too strong. Where's our sphere? Let's see. Let's move around a little. Right there. And so this is supposed to be a pure white sphere, so this is pretty strong of a hit. And if you guys haven't seen this little graphic yet, I posted it on the Patreon. This gives you a good idea of Kelvin values. It was nearing sunset, but not quite. So we're going to try to see what we get if we go to 3,000. That's way too sunset looking. So let's try 4,000. This is a little closer. So maybe 42,000 or 4,200. 44. This is a little closer. $46. 48, I guess, is good enough. We might have to adjust the direction a little. See where the shadows are coming from. So maybe like that. And the intensity might still be too strong, so let's try 0.5. It might be okay. 0.8. The color hue is a little too strong though, so we're going to cool this down. So let's try 5,000. 6,000. Yeah, let's go with 5,200. I think this is a little better. And let's adjust our shaders to compensate for the light. And yeah, you guys can see how we could spend hours kind of messing around with the materials. But yeah, I think this is a good starting point. So we've got our assets laid out. We've got a little bit of atmosphere, maybe not enough. And we're going to end up just adjusting these things and then texture painting the materials. But that's a whole other process. And so this tutorial is already kind of dragged on. I think we're almost on hour 3. But we've gotten our camera in. We've got the tracking. We've got the ASIS workflow from our footage to our scene. We started to lay out our assets. We've got the mat for the ground for the water illusion. So yeah, we're gonna test this out in a bit and just see how it looks inside of Nuke before wrapping up this tutorial and moving on in the next tutorial to more advanced material work on the structures, and then rendering everything, compositing everything, and putting it all into place with atmosphere and stuff. So I'm gonna pause this for now and I'll be right back. So here we are back. I'm just gonna keep adding little details to our assets, and this is the asset file. So I keep all the assets separate while I work on them alone. And so this is just the asset tree. And so here's our asset collection from Kit Bash. And so I'm just going in there and making adjustments and tweaking it. And so I'm going to be doing this off camera. I mean, it's just going to be box modeling and adding details. You guys don't need to really see this. And so while I develop this here and I write it out as a BGO file in our primary scene, if we load that up in our beach scene, it automatically updates to the new geometry since I'm working on it and writing out and loading it back in to this scene. So if you're coming from Maya, it's kind of like you're referencing the BGO assets, so you're referencing a separate scene. And I worked on our scene a little bit more, so I adjusted the HDR to match the shadows a little better and the directional light, and I laid out the buildings a little differently. So I'm still adjusting this and tweaking it, and I actually found out why the camera post effects was resetting. For some reason, when I imported the Alembic camera, the redshift camera tag was not automatically added, so that was the problem, guys. So if you import the Alembic file and for some reason your post effects or your ASIS OCIO is resetting every time you do something, it's because the Alembic import forgot to add the redshift camera properties. So make sure you click the camera properties when you have your camera selected, and it'll automatically set that up for you. And so now it's not resetting every time I move around and test things. And yeah, one of the other things I started working on also is making some matte shapes. And so if I move around here, you'll notice this white box here. This is actually our matte. And so if I let's load up our point cloud here. The idea is that this matte, these shapes are going to be somewhere where this cliff kind of edge is, this little hill. And so the structures are a little further behind it. And then our other structures that are way out here, they're way out there. And I might need to extend the plane further to make sure I get within range of these structures that are way out here. I'm not exactly sure in real world what the distance is back there to this area. It might be like I don't know, a kilometer more. So this is just a guess. And anyways, the matte structures here, if we come down here, this is just some spheres with subdivisions, and I sculpted some of the shapes a little and a mountain sop so that it breaks up and gives us these little nice little shapes. And so what this is for, we go back to our Alembic camera. Oops. Actually, I was selecting the Alembic camera view, so let me hit Control Z. There we go. So what they're going to do is, if we were to come in here, you'll notice that the shapes are kind of following the contour of our hillside. And later on, I'm going to actually use some tree geometry to get more detailed edges. But this is to kind of just block in the shape where we want to cut it off. We might need to do it over here also. And so if I render this, and let's just fire out a render. And actually, I think I need to switch to the camera. There we go. I'm gonna let that go for a little bit while I keep talking. The matte shape just has, under the Redshift matte section, just show background, matte enabled. I don't want it to have an alpha, and I don't want it to reflect or cast shadows or anything. I just want it to cut out the geometry. So that's what it's doing here. So if we move in here, you can see how it's kind of cutting out that shape, and it's a little loose. Let's increase the scale here. Let's just do 4K. And we'll just do IPR progressive, since right now I'm just showing you guys this. I'm going to render out a frame and take it into Nuke just to see how it all kind of looks also. But as you can see, the post effects is locked in, and the shape that we had, our little rocks, or our blob shape, is matting out and cutting out our structure. And so that's loose. Like I said, we're going to end up using maybe some tree models or something scattered on top, just to make better detail on the way it's cutting out the form. And it looks like, oh, there we go. I don't know what's going on. Is it freezing? What's happening? Why is no? I don't want. I want progressive mode. I'm using 3.0, so there's some things are still a little bit buggy, but overall it seems to be kind of stable-ish. But we'll see. Okay, there we go. Progressive's back on. Yeah, and so now our post effects is saving because I added that camera tag. And so I ended up adjusting the colors. And actually I need to readjust the grouping colors on these edges because I'm modeling a little bit. That changes the group IDs. So the final looked more like this, where we have these groups here. So I got to regroup that. But actually, I'm not going to bother, since I'm going to keep modeling this and adjusting it and adding more details. So there's no point in doing that because I'm going to have to redo it anyways. But as you can see, the background here is now cut out. It's obviously too sharp, but I think you guys get a good idea of what's going on. And I think there's motion blur on it right now, or depth of field. So we're going to actually take that off because we're going to do that in comp. But overall, it's starting to come together and, you know, look pretty good. And so if I skip through frames, let's just check out what we've got. I don't know why it's going so slow. Might be because I'm using 4K, so let's just make this smaller. And so yeah, it's all, you know, looking good. It's tracking, it's moving the way it should, and whatnot. So cool. So I think for the next step, I'm going to take this in a Nuke just to kind of see how it all looks. And for part 2, which we're going to do for next month, is we're going to start to texture paint this a little better, maybe inside of Mari, or we might just projection paint directly on it. I'm thinking I'm going to bring in some birds or something, a bird rig, and have it fly by, a couple birds. And yeah, just start to bring it all together. I think that the orange was just not working for the shot. It was too strong, too intense. And I think I like this more, this like muted gray and brownish kind of color a little more. It feels more in place. So we're gonna go with that, and we might bring in some VDB clouds for our background in the next part, and maybe a card of a planet, or I don't know. We'll see what we do. So, but I think that for now, this is pretty successful for part 1. So let me render this out in 4K and send it over to Nuke and just see what everything looks like. So I'll be right back. Alright, here we are inside of Nuke. I just loaded up our single frame. Actually, I didn't check what frame we're on. Frame 142. So we need to be on 142 here for it to line up correctly. And pretty much all it is we're just loading in our shot. And I had it mirrored over, graded, adding a little bit of grading, pre-molt to get rid of all the background stuff. And in the final render, honestly, I'm just going to hide the background because I think it'll just skip rendering it completely and it'll be faster for all our animation. But for now, it's good to have the background just so we can make sure everything's lining up. From there, I shuffled out our velocity just to get a vector blur in there so we could get a little bit of that motion blur. So if you disable it, and actually it looks like it's vector blurring in the wrong direction, up and down, when it should, the shuffle should be this way. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and so now if we were to increase or decrease this, you know, we're getting motion blur. You guys should know how to do this already from my AOVs tutorial. If not, you know, I'm gonna go over all this a little bit more when we actually do our animation and compositing after we're done with everything in Houdini. This is just a quick setup to kind of see how everything's looking together. Added a little bit of noise using the special Luminoise nodes. They I think they're linked in my Patreon under the tools section. And if they're not, just Google Luma Nuke nodes, and they're from Luma Pictures, so the movie company, the VFX company, and they have their Nuke gizmos here. And so they're a bunch of cool little nodes that you guys could use that are pretty useful. So this is one of my favorites, their noise node, and it gives just nice convincing noise. And we merge that back on top of our footage. So here's our original footage plate. And so obviously you could see that we need to adjust the atmosphere. And right here we're going to have to, maybe using the same technique, just blob in some shapes to cut that out. But we'll be dealing with that later. And, you know, this is just a quick cutout. It's not too fancy. So the idea is that we're going to import some trees, a tree shape, and then just scatter it on top of those, the blobbed out shape. And that'll just give us nicer of a matte cutout. That way we don't have to roto anything or do any of that stuff. And the color looks okay. We might, you know, at the end when we do final grading and adjusting and stuff like that, we'll be doing other things. The specular pass has to be added this way, so that's over here. You can see how we've got our specular. And so we're not going to add them together. We're actually just doing an over, so it doesn't multiply the specular on the buildings, but it adds it to where our coast, our water, had none. So we pre-molt, which cut it out from the buildings because our alpha is there for our buildings, but not for our water. That's why I didn't have it activated for the water or for the rocks or the blob mat that we made, the garbage mat. And so that way it just cuts it from the buildings. and that way we keep only the reflection on the water surface. And we'll probably have to adjust this later. I mean, it looks okay. We might just increase the bump or tweak that a little bit depending on how we feel, to get it to match the ocean surface a little better. And that gets merged back on top, and that gives us this. Then I mirrored it over. I personally like the composition this way a little more, but we could, maybe that's just because I've been staring at it the other way for so long. After that, I added the Redshift Tone Mapper node. You guys can get that off my Patreon, and it just gives you all the photographic exposure options and stuff. And finally, we ended up going with the reformat, since I do think I'm going to want to do something trimmed like this. That might be trimming it too much, so we might try a little different aspect ratio. We'll see. And at the end, I might actually transform the entire thing. Since we have the extra space, we might be able to crop in and rotate the entire shot just to give us a little more dynamic horizon line. So we might drop down a transform. Let's just drop it down here. Move this over. And we might end up picking a center part. So the what is it? The width on this is, or no, that's the height. Let's disable this. Actually, no, let's enable this, but what is the height on our original 4K is 2160. So 2160 divided by 2, 1080, 1920. So the center would be, 1080, 1920. So that gives us our center. Oh, actually, it was already centered. So yeah, that's our center. And we might end up rotating it a little bit. That's too much. So we might do a little something dynamic. Who knows? Maybe something like that. I'm not sure yet. The only problem if we do that is that we're going to end up with these edges here. So we could fix that either by stretching or by using a little bit of overscan and zooming in our final shot. I'm not sure if we'll do that or not. Kind of depends. I mean, it kind of works too, also flat. Maybe we'll just do -1. Just a little subtle bit of turn, -2. Something like that, maybe. So we'll see. And in the end, that's the plan. So this will be animated. It'll be an animated pan. I hope to bring in some clouds and maybe a flock of birds or seagulls, I don't know, flying by or something, just to add a little more movement into our shot on top of the water movement. So cool. I think that just about covers the plan and the progress. So we've got a pretty good starting foundation here, going from our original plate with just log footage and where we want to take everything after bringing in the CG and stuff and getting the structures in and layout. Got the camera tracked and everything. So this is our goal. We're going to go some in this direction here. So yeah, but that we'll be going over more of that, the detail and the smaller stuff. Maybe get some smoke movement, or like a little bit of smoke coming out of a pipe or something. I don't know. We'll see something what might end up doing. But I think that covers part 1. So part 1's pretty much done. Just kind of getting the base block in, the layout, the tracking, and everything working together from Nuke to Houdini and back and forth. So for part 2, which will be next month, we'll be going over all the extra finessing and details. And then if there is a part 3, we might that'll be almost all in Nuke, and we might just do projection painting, maybe add just lots of little painted in details and stuff inside of a Photoshop and camera projecting it back on. We'll see. And yeah, cool. So thanks again, guys, for all the support. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys learned something cool. If you guys don't know Nuke, this was, I hope, pretty simple. It's not anything really complicated inside of Nuke, so anyone should be able to follow along with the basics. And yeah, the covers kind of the whole pipeline back and forth. Like I said, I'm no compositing genius. I'm not a camera tracker guy, but I think this is good enough information for most people to kind of start rolling with it and then take things further on their own and develop their skills further. But yeah, and now that Redshift 3.0 has released, there's going to be a lot more updates on that end, so I'll probably be making more videos covering some of that new stuff as it starts rolling out, since there's a lot of really big things changing, especially when it comes to OSL. That's going to be big, so I'm really looking forward to that. The whole sampling system's changing, so we got to cover that stuff too. A lot of you guys know my sampling tutorial that's pretty long, so a lot of that stuff might not even be relevant anymore in the near future, so something to keep in mind. But yeah, thanks again, guys, for all the support on Patreon and on YouTube. I really appreciate it. And if you guys have any questions or anything like that, or any other requests for the future, feel free to ask, and we might go over that stuff later on. Thanks.